Welcome to Building Stories, the podcast where we tell honest, sometimes funny stories about construction and digital transformation. Very excited today to have Ronan Collins with us. He's a special guest who's a pioneer in digital engineering in BIM. From managing MRT projects in Kuala Lumpur with laser scanning and GIS to leading high-profile projects in Hong Kong and Macau. You've pretty much seen and done it all, mate. BIM, drones, AR, and more. And you're not just about the tech. You're also a business owner, engineer, with a passion for sharing your knowledge. So let's dive into it with an industry leader from Ireland and Asia. That's an interesting crossover.
Good morning,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks, mate. So your young years, mate, as you're growing up, were there any hints that you were going to be involved in this industry? You were going to be building things, making things when you
Yeah, there was
grow up?
there was no get there was no getting away from it. My grandfather was a builder, so when I didn't get the chance to work with him, he was retired by the time I grew up to be allowed on a construction site. But I spent my years with him doing projects around the house, fixing things, and doing a bit of carpentry and doing a bit of tiling. And every so often, he had me mixing cement and concrete, and so I was kind of bred into it in a lot of ways. And him and my grandmother's still around. Bernie, she's 97, so she's still going strong. And yeah, they were a huge part in getting me into the construction industry. Actually, they were big on schooling and maths and science and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of led into construction at a very early age, basically.
Awesome. And this is back in
Oh,
Ireland,
cool.
yeah?
Yeah, so I grew up in the west of Ireland. I was raised in a place called Sligo in the northwest of Ireland, small little town, probably about 50,000 people. And my grandfather was a builder on the west coast. So he was building schools and community centres, and kind of got involved in things like hotels and residential and all that kind of stuff. Kind of general family builder kind of business. So it was good. And then yeah, my mum and dad were both entrepreneurs. My mum was running a home business. She used to make uniforms for all the local schools, and that was basically to get us through school and college. So she was basically creating an income from that. And my dad's an accountant, so my dad was running a small accountancy business as well.
Okay, right. So you're also, right into the technology piece. So I guess growing up, where does it start? Does it start at the on site? Like, are you working for a builder at some point, or is it the technology? What gets you involved more in that industry?
So the technology part is quite interesting. So when I was a secondary student, which is back in the early '90s, I was basically exposed to CAD for the first time. So the school bought one computer. Can you imagine a school with one computer nowadays? And they bought
Yeah.
the very early versions of CAD. And technical drafting was one of my favorite subjects in school. So the teacher basically, as soon as we finished the actual drafting work with pencils and rulers, we were allowed into the computer lab. So we got down the back and we could start drawing a rectangle was an achievement in those days because you had to basically put in the dots and then join the dots. And then when I got into college, I was in college in '92 through '96, and that was when computers started to become a thing. So we were in the computer labs and we were starting to look at like Excel, and it all sounds bonkers now, but it was all really early days in the computing world. And then I joined Arups in 1996. And when I joined, there was one computer for all the engineers in the division. So there was probably 20 engineers sharing one computer. And it had a
Wow.
very kind of robust, it was a Unix. There was a Unix workstation and there was a PC station. And they had early versions of Arup's analysis software. So you had to sit there for hours typing in nodes, and then you had to connect the nodes together to create members in order to create an analysis frame, and then you generate the actual results, and then you have to print it out and figure it out. And the only guys that had computers were the CAD team. So we had about 7 or 8 guys who had computers, and they had basically CAD on those. There was no computers, any desks. So I then got asked to join as the graduate. I got asked to join the IT team, and I started helping with the guys putting basically PCs on everybody's desks and giving everybody email accounts. So, and at one point there was my boss, a guy called Fergus Monaghan, a really great character. He came in one day and said, "I need to buy you a skirt because you seem to be spending all your time writing my email." So I would have to show him how to write an email, how to put an email address in, how to get the whole thing to work. And we look about like my 10-year-old can do more than he could do back in the day. So yeah, so the
Wow.
world has dramatically changed. So I've been kind of on the edge of technology all the way through my career. But
So did you study structural engineering? Did you?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I studied civil structural engineering. So I spent 4 years in University College Dublin doing a classic civil engineering, structural engineering degree. and then graduated in '96 and joined Arups.
Oh, cool. And so coming out of that, we're now writing emails. We've got
thankfully, and a few other
sophistication.
Things. Yeah. So then what happened was that the in that kind of timetable, 96 through 2000, the whole thing changed really, really quickly. So all of a sudden, everybody had computers on their desks. I got my hands on a copy of Rhino early days, and we started doing some simple meshing and started building out 3D models with the engineers, and then using that to run analysis. So we figured out how to get wireframes into GSE and do the actual analysis that way. And then the ambition was always to do a bit of traveling. So 99, 2000, I started looking out for an opportunity to travel. And a job opportunity came up through another Irish fella called Ronan in Delaney, who's now actually, I think, in Brisbane, still with Arups actually. And Ronan got me out to Arups in Hong Kong. So I got a job in Hong Kong. And you can imagine you leave Ireland and you fly out to Hong Kong and these guys must have this really figured out. These guys must be really cutting edge. And you kind of get out there and you go, oh God, there's a lot of learning to go here. So I basically started introducing the guys in Hong Kong to Rhino and other tools, but they were still really driven by the Hong Kong regulations, which are still a lot paper driven because the building department in Hong Kong is a very traditional government run agency. So you're doing your CAD work and then you're printing out your drawings. But then you got to go down to the buildings department and start updating the drawings with Tipex and markers and signatures and everything else. It's an unwieldy process. But yeah, so I was in Arups in 2000 in Hong Kong, and we started doing some pretty clever stuff then. And the guys were into some really, really clever stuff with some finite element modeling and all that kind of stuff. But it was in 2003 that I decided that working for Arups was fine, but I wanted to try my hand in my own business. So I set up my own company in Hong Kong in 2003, and that was all technology. That was all about technology and selling technology to engineers and contractors.
I guess as we move into kind of modern history of Ronan, is there some key moments there, when even, I guess, as you're starting your own business, what really is clicking? What are your customers, back in 2003, 2004, like what are they after that you were selling?
Yeah, so it was quite interesting. So before I set up my own company, I was doing some research inside of Arup as to what was going on, what the trends were, and there was two things that were quite obvious to me. There was a huge need in the contractor side to get hands on some of these technologies, and there was a huge need to up the skills of the engineers in terms of using 3D tools and 3D technologies. So the ambition with setting up the company was to try and get ahead of some of that. So I was looking at like 4D technology. So Stanford had done a lot of research around 4D and what the opportunities were with 4D. And we'd done some basic stuff when I was at Arups, but we hadn't really explored it too much. So when I set the company up originally, the idea was to do two things. One was to sell software. So I signed an agreement with a company called CSC out of the UK, and they were selling things like TEDS and structural steel program and some other engineering software tools. So we started promoting that in Hong Kong. And then in parallel, I started basically going around to contractors and basically showing them what you could do with 3D models and started explaining to them what the possibilities were, because it was quite obvious that the contractors were going to get onto this quicker than the engineers were in terms of the value. So I got lucky. I got a couple of lucky breaks as I went along. So a good friend of mine, Rick Borger, got me a job working for RMD, and we did a complete 3D model of a scaffolding formwork system for what is now called Stonecutters Bridge. It was a massive undertaking, and we did all the modeling in CAD, and then we did all the rendering in Maya. So I had a couple of guys that knew how to use Maya. So I was basically sitting at a workstation building models and then handing them over to the guys as 3D meshes for them to then animate and sequence. So we basically had a combination of my engineering skills and my modeling skills, and I combined that with a team of guys who were basically really good animators, and we basically set up this kind of construction simulation business. So we started doing construction sequence presentations, and the contractors started to see an advantage because when they went into a tender, they had a much better presentation and a much better understanding of the job. So some of the contractors started to see that as an advantage. And then Leighton's cottoned onto it. Another guy that I worked with, a guy called Peter Wiley, cottoned onto what we were doing, and he got me involved in a couple of tenders for Leighton's. And it just grew from there. So once you start building up that client base and start building up those relationships, you start figuring out what those guys want, and you start figuring out ways of delivering it. So at one point, I had a couple of guys working for Geary on a building in Hong Kong using Geary Technologies, which is basically aeronautical software, which is kind of out there bunkers. And then a lot of guys were just doing solid 3D CAD modeling. So we were doing like, what was it called? AutoCAD architecture and AutoCAD 3D basically with the early days. This is all pre-Revit. And then we didn't see Revit until 2006, I would guess 2005, 2006. We got our hands on Revit for the first time, and then it was clear where this whole thing was going. So yeah, so basically the business started off with, I'm going to fix the industry, which 20 years later I'm still trying to figure out what the hell that meant, because the industry still hasn't been fixed, as you guys know. And then basically just offering solutions to contractors, basically figuring out what they needed, what they were willing to pay for, and delivering on that promise.
Yeah. So, like, as you reflect, I want to pick up on this industry shift because it's a struggle. What's going on? Like, there's the saying of, the rudders trying to steer this big ship. I guess as we look back over 20 years, we see there's this slight curve, like maybe we've shifted a little bit. What do you think that is? What is shifting it, and what's not shifting it?
So yeah, it's kind of it's one of those things where you get lots of enthusiasm starting out, and then you got lots of demoralized as you go along, and then you stand back and you go, what the hell is actually going on here? And essentially, it comes down to money. So a lot of the issues that we see, and I've seen it on every job I've done. So whether it's on jobs 2 years ago or 15 years ago, the same problems are cropping up. You have an industry where the architects and the engineers are going out first and bidding for work to get design work. And the architects are probably better at this than most. The top end architects can basically name their price and they get paid. And then everybody else has to basically scrap for the rest. So most architectural firms are running on pretty tight margins. And then the engineering companies, you've got these huge conglomerates, the AECOMs of the world, the MOTS of the world, the WSPs, and they're all playing the same game. They're all basically trying to clobber the other fella to try and win the work. So some of them put in decent fees, but a lot of them are working on pretty tight margins. And then the way they run the jobs, you guys have been in the industry, they give you a timesheet system, and they say, right, we've got 100 hours to deliver this thing, get it done in 80, and don't waste any time. And then they all get involved in meetings and workshops and everything else, and all the time gets burned up in basically talking shops. And then at the end of the process, some clown's got to produce drawings, and those drawings come out in a rapid fashion, half-cooked, half-baked, incomplete, insufficient for construction. And then the construction industry, the contractors are all sitting there going, okay, if I go in at this, the risk is here, I can probably claim some money over here. And they put in a price that doesn't cover the full price of the job normally, and then they try and look for ways to claw the money back. So everybody's working on tight margins. Everybody's basically trying to outplay the other fella, and no one's spending any time or money developing skills, developing software solutions, developing talent. We're just running from one job to the next job to the next job as quick as we possibly can on the tightest possible margins. And I think
like right from the start, the chips are stacked against us right from the start.
Yeah. And then to compound all of that, we work in a very siloed industry. So I might get a job this week working for one contractor, but there's no guarantee I'm going to be working for that contractor 2 years down the road, 4 years down the road. There's no relationship. There's no real long-term relationships. So people are not willing to make the investments. And then when it comes to things like you guys in the intro mentioned things like drones, augmented reality, all that kind of really, really, really good stuff, people are afraid to learn and train people up, because if I train somebody up, well, then he's going to go work for the other guy next week, and he's not going to have to pay for the training costs. There's this mentality of like, I don't want to spend money training up my staff because then they're going to leave. It's like, well, that's bonkers, but that's another issue, right? So, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to money. It all comes down to dollars and cents. And if you don't have a business case for whatever it is you're trying to do, you're not getting very far.
Yeah, very true. And you can kind of see you're linking your experience along with trying to run a business. Coming up with those insights.
You've got to find ways of making money, otherwise you don't have a business. Like we got lucky in a couple of cases. I was telling somebody this week, I was in a meeting this week, and we're putting together a proposal for a client, and we were having a conversation about, do you do a lump sum proposal, do you put in a schedule of rates? And I said, look, you're bidding to a contractor, so the only thing the contractor understands is rates. So in order for you to actually demonstrate how you come up with your fee, you got to give them the rates. So you basically come up with you work out your rates, you work out your hours, and you say, look, I'm going to sign a lump sum agreement, but I just want you to know how I've come up with this fee agreement, right? And then we were doing a job, I won't say where, but it was for a casino project. And we got called in, and the contractor was in a bit of strife. They were trying to put something together. There was a lot of issues, and there was no models. It was all been done in 2D. So the guy knew what we were capable of. So he said, Ronan, can you give me a price for doing this part of the development? And then hopefully we'll see if we can scale up the work. And he didn't give me a whole lot of information, didn't give me a whole lot of confidence. So I basically put in our top end rates. I put in a pretty hefty margin on those rates. And I basically gave him an estimate of hours. And I said, look, this is the fee. This is what it's going to be. And he said, okay, fine. And he signed a purchase order. And the purchase order was baked. The rates were baked into the purchase order. So we got stuck into the work. And then about 3 months later, I got a phone call going, how many more staff have you got? And I said, what do you mean? I said, I want you to have a look at the casino floor and this area and this area and this area. I said, okay, well, I'm going to need the drawings so I can actually put together a proposal, give you. He says, don't worry about all that. We've got your rates. Just give me the guys. I want them on the job site. How soon can they start? So we started mobilizing people onto the job at top end rates with beefy margins, and we made a stack of money. But we got super lucky. But it wasn't that it was planned out that way. But you've got to have that commercial announce. You've got to have to figure out, how am I going to win the work, and how am I going to get the guy to understand the value?
Well, that's the thing. They saw the value in that rate, so they didn't think that they were, they thought it was a good price, and they were getting
They
the
were getting value.
So,
We saved them multiples, if not tens of multiples of money in terms of what we were doing.
That's right. Yeah. So what are some of the challenges along your career journey up until now? Like, you've talked through, I guess, some of the wrestle of technology and things, but were there some real blockers, some things you mentally had to just wrestle with to try and solve?
Well, it's always a people issue. So one of the things that we kind of figured out along the way was, and Martin Angus is a very good friend of mine, and he was one, and another fellow, Stuart Belcher, who's gone out to the UK. There was 3 of us in the company in Hong Kong that kind of figured this out as a kind of a team at one point. And what we figured out was, Ronan's really good at winning work, and Ronan's really good at going out and fronting up the company. But we don't want Ronan involved in delivering projects, because it's chaos. Because I go in and I want to do things better and fix things and everything else. So we had this agreement that Martin and Stuart would actually get on and do the projects. So we basically got to a system where I was the CEO effectively, or more importantly, the marketing manager, and go out, negotiate with the clients, build a relationship with the clients. And then we would win the work, and I would basically hand the project over to the guys. And then I would basically get them to report to me on what was happening, and not get involved in resourcing the job, planning out the works, making sure things were delivered, because I would just drive everybody nuts, because I would keep moving things around. And so the challenge there is, I really wanted the thing to perform really well, but I also had to realize that my way of doing things is actually counterproductive when it comes to doing project delivery. So you just got to get out of the guy's way and let them get on with it. So that was quite interesting. But people management is a real challenge. So I got kind of a real awakening once. We were having a dinner one night. We won a major contract. We started delivering. Client was happy, so I took the guys all out for dinner. There was probably 12 or 15 of us, and we brought out a couple of the crew we were working with, some of our customers. So we booked out a restaurant in Hong Kong. I think there was like 3 or 4 tables. So we were all busy getting stuck into a nice meal, having a couple of drinks. And at one point, the conversation kicked off about somebody was there. A lot of the guys in Hong Kong have got families overseas. So a lot of the guys are from the Philippines and got families back in the Philippines. So one of the guys said, yeah, my wife's back in the Philippines. I got a couple of kids and looking after the father-in-law. And so I'm like, so the money I'm paying you, how much that's going offshore? I was, oh yeah, basically 65% of the money is going back to the Philippines. I'm like, so how many people are you supporting? He's like, oh yeah, well, about 4 or 5. And I'm like going, hang on a second. So I basically kind of spent the next hour just kind of wandering around talking to people and going, just so I get a picture of this. Like, who are you looking after? How's this panning out? And by the time I'd finished the evening, I walked out of the restaurant, but basically a feeling of real pride and a feeling of absolute horror, because you realize that for the 12 people that were working for me, there's about 80 people depending on us.
Yeah.
So you suddenly realize that this entrepreneurial thing is great fun, and you think, oh, I'm going to go change construction and I'm going to get all the technology stuff sorted out. But actually, at the end of the day, you're paying people to come to work, and they're not going to go out and start another company. They're not going to go out and transform the industry. They've just got one objective: is to earn money to pay for their kids to go to school, to pay for the bills for their medicine for their parents. It's a very, very eye-opening experience when you realize that when I go do my thing, I'm not just doing it for me, I'm doing it for the staff in my office and their extended families. And that's very humbling and it's terrifying at the same time.
And that's a really good perspective to have, to realize that, it's important what you're doing, but there's also an element of stress or an element of responsibility in what we're doing as well, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think for the likes of you and I, it's like we kind of thrive on that kind of challenge. It's like I've never enjoyed being on somebody else's payroll. I've always thoroughly enjoyed running my own business, and I've spent the last couple of years working for other people, and that's predominantly to look after my family. So like I've got a 10-year-old boy. So when he was born, we moved back to Malaysia. My wife's from here, so the focus changed from running the company to looking after the family myself. But that's not going to last much longer. He's rapidly becoming a teenager, and he's getting his own gig sorted out. So I'm no longer required, kind of thing. So I'll go back to doing my own business again pretty soon, I think.
I'm sure that entrepreneurial spirit's going to be passed down.
Oh, we'll see. He came in recently. He said, "Dad, he's big into swimming, so he's a competitive swimmer. So as competitive as a 10-year-old can be. So he wants to get these fancy new swim shorts. So he worked out how much they were going to cost. So I think they're going to cost like 300 ringgit or something, which is about $80. And he says, "Dad, I'll tell you what, Dad, I'm going to start doing some stuff around the house." And he sat down, he wrote out basically a shopping list: sweep the floor, clean the sink, put the rubbish out, do the cars, feed the dogs. And then it was like price list put down. So that's pretty good, yeah. So and then he had me sign it. So I was like, okay, this is serious. And then he started doing all these projects. This didn't last very long. It lasted a couple of days. And then I was talking to my next door neighbor. He says, "Oh, Michael's offered to clean my car." I said, "Yeah, how much is he going to charge you?" And he was going to charge my neighbor half what he was charging me. So I said to him, why is the neighbor getting it for half? Oh, well, he's our friend, so he gets a special discount. I'm going, what about your parents?
Yeah,
so he's definitely going to get a bit of the entrepreneurial thing rubbing off.
What are you most proud of, mate? You've done a lot of things through a very long career, decades long. But what are you most proud of in that career to date? Any particular project or some particular thing you're happy that your name's attached to?
I don't think my name's attached to too many projects, thankfully. I think the one thing I take great pride in is to see other people take on this mantle and actually drive things forward. So I take great pride in some of the things that have kind of happened because I've done something or because I've seen something lit up. So like in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Institute for BIM has thrived. They've made really solid inroads in Hong Kong. Like we moved back to Malaysia for family reasons. I still love Hong Kong as a place. I'd love to go back and work there. But we left an impact, and people have moved their thinking around digital solutions and BIM and everything else. Not entirely because of me, but I played my part in it. There was a huge number of people involved in setting up those kind of groups and those institutes, but the community has woken up to the fact that this is the way to go forwards. And I still remember key people and some of the big contractors. Like at one point, they used to joke. I got introduced in a meeting one day. Here comes Mr. BIM. So they all know what my forte is. But the thing I'm most proud of is that we did move the needle, and the needle continues to move. So I've got to that point in my career now where this year I'm turning 50. I've probably still got 20 years in front of me. I'm not the type that's going to retire, but the mission has changed from transforming to more educational. So getting out, sharing knowledge, sharing experience. I'm trying to figure out if I can build like an online training program and kind of build an online community and get people involved in that and just take questions. A lot of the stuff I've done recently with webinars and stuff, it's the questions at the end have been fascinating. And you have to pinch yourself. You kind of like, I did one session recently and someone was like, so what is Navisworks? And I'm going, okay, we're starting there. So you kind of, you spend your whole career at the bleeding edge of industry, and then you realize that 80% of the people have never heard of some of these tools or some of these processes. And you have to go back and really start the whole process again in terms of how you build a model, how you link that to a construction schedule, how you get the quantities out of that. Like, forget about getting to what you guys are doing in terms of data extraction and data mining. It's like, that's at the top end of the industry. But the middle of the industry, the large proportion of the industry, some of them are still brand new to this whole kind of BIM kind of phenomenon, which is mind-bending when you think about it. Like, I've been at this for more than 20 years. It's mind-bending that people still don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and
maybe it's not a bad thing that they don't know what Navisworks is.
We tend to find ourselves, especially in our little digital engineering space, as in a bit of an echo chamber. And I like what you're bringing up here. We just got to keep pushing that out to a wider audience.
Yeah, and it was
Yeah,
actually quite interesting. There was something on LinkedIn this week where I think it was in the UK. I didn't latch on. Normally, I latch onto these things and stick my oar in where I shouldn't, but this one I just let slide by. But the comment was basically that this whole phenomenon of BIM, information management, the data analytics part, had become an additional cost to the industry and basically unbalanced cost. In other words, it wasn't actually delivering the value it was supposed to deliver. And I think the community that we're in, are going to have to check ourselves and say, are we actually adding value, or are we just bloating this out for the sake of bloating it out? And I think that's a real conundrum now. I think there's kind of an industry that's kind of grown out of like people offering these kind of solutions without understanding the value. And I think that's where we've really got to be very careful that, like, if you're building a model, what are you building that model for? If you're providing an asset management data structure to a client, what is it they're going to use that for, and how are they going to use it? I think there is a certain risk that we've overdone it in certain quadrants, in certain areas, and we've underdone it in the majority of those areas. So I think we've got to be really clear that we've still got to sell the value of these tools and these technologies, and we still got to train people. And I think it goes back to what we mentioned earlier on. If there's no training going on, and there's no understanding going on, people are going to look at this as a cost. And
yeah,
if there's already noise coming out of senior players in the industry that this whole thing is a fallacy and BIM doesn't work and it's just an additional cost, we've got to start speaking to that and start getting that message back that we haven't moved all that far in 20 years, and people are now coming up with pretty hefty fees for building these models, pretty hefty fees for managing these models. But if they're not adding value, then we have a serious problem. So I think that's, to me, that's something we got to keep a really keen eye on, is that we've still got to keep hounding home why we're doing this, not just how it's being done.
definitely. BIM was a revolution that we were all part of, but like, if it didn't actually, like any revolution, it should just become a new way of doing things. And I still don't think we've kind of got there as an industry. Like, it's still seen as an add-on in some cases.
Yeah, and for those clients who've got it, they've got it. No, there's no question about it. But a lot of clients have and the clients blame the new technology rather than figuring out what the underlying problem is. So, like, I used to say, I got on the podium once and said, I think it was only 4 or 5 years ago, I made a broad statement that I've been doing BIM for 15 years. I've never seen BIM done properly, and people went, "What? What? You're the guy that knows how to do it?" And you go, "Yeah, but you're not doing it properly." And I'm involved in a project right now, which I'm not going to share much detail about, but it's a reasonably large infrastructure project in Asia, and there's people building models that shouldn't be anywhere near modeling tools. And there's engineers doing design that never looked at models. And I went into a meeting and I'd spent probably a couple of days looking through a kind of a federated model of structures, mechanical systems, architectural systems. And I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It was just junk. So I went into the meeting with the engineers and going, guys, has anybody looked at these models? And they're like, well, the model, I'm not doing the models. That's the BIM team. And I'm like, okay, let me show you some stuff here. So I showed them a couple of issues and I showed them a couple of problems, and lift shafts not in the right place, ceilings that were basically completely in the wrong level, a whole bunch of stuff. And you couldn't even figure out what to build, let alone how to build the stuff. And the engineers were, yeah, but that's the BIM team. I said, no, mate, this is your design in a 3D format. And if you don't start reviewing your design in these 3D models, guess what's going to happen? And he goes, what's going to happen? The contractor's going to come in here and they're going to be claiming out of us for the next God knows how long because your design sucks. And sometimes I just have to lose the rag, throw all the toys out of the pram, and just start banging the table, because it's the only way these guys actually listen. There's still a culture where the engineers think that BIM and CAD are some secondary kind of process that they have nothing to do with. We seem to have lost some of the way in terms of, no, the engineer is responsible for the drawings, and the drawings are coming from the models. So the engineer is responsible for the models, not the BIM team. And if you're not figuring this out, you're going to answer to me, and I'm going to keep banging the table till you get this in your thick skulls. And I think that's another challenge we're seeing, is that the industry hasn't cottoned on to, in certain corners, how to run these processes. It's become this kind of parallel universe, that there's the traditional engineering, the traditional design teams, all the meetings, all the minutes, all that great stuff. And then in a parallel universe, there's a bunch of guys making models, and they're doing their clash analysis, and they're doing all this wonderful stuff. but that's not the design. That's separate. And I think that's a thing we got to watch out for.
Yeah, definitely. So imagine someone coming up now in the industry, and they want to put BIM in their job title one day, maybe, or they want to work in design consultancies or construction. What's one piece of advice you would give someone who's kind of coming into the industry now?
Don't put BIM in your title.
That's a good one. I like that.
So I think that's the challenge. I think if some, like, if my 10-year-old comes to me and says, "Dad, I wanted to study engineering," I'll tell him, forget about it, go and do AI. But if he's still adamant he wants to go into engineering, I'll basically tell him, you've got to learn how to do these 3D modeling techniques. You've got to learn how to use these models. You've got to learn how to use them for communication, for coordination. You've got to get involved in these things. You've got to be able to build virtually if you want to build in reality. And if you're going to be a really good engineer, structural engineer, mechanical engineer going forward, you've got to have this skill set. It's like having a second language. If you're not comfortable opening up a mobile device or a PC and delving into a Navisworks model, an ACC cloud model, a Revisto model, whatever version of tool you want to use, BIM Collab, an IFC viewer, I don't care. But you've got to be able to get into the model, get around the model, cut a section out of the model, find objects in the model, identify design issues, and then communicate those issues to other people, get them fixed, get the design updated, then go back and check that the thing is being done. If you can't understand how to do that process, you shouldn't call yourself an engineer, let alone call yourself a BIM person. We ideally, what we want is, we don't want BIM staff anymore. What we want is, we want classic engineers, classic architects that are BIM capable. That's what we really want. But the BIM industry has created an entire separate industry, and I think that's something we've got to figure out. So in terms of kids coming out of college, I don't know how much training they get. When I was in college, we were given exposure to CAD tools and the like, but you would never be considered competent with those tools coming out of college. So I don't buy the argument that we need to teach the kids in school how to do this. I think we got to teach the kids when they come into industry how to do this. So when they're, as graduates coming into industry, they should be set up to do this. But then industry's not ready for it. So when you go into, if you're a graduate coming out of school and you join a major contractor or a major engineering firm, it's going to be business as usual with those guys. So if you're an engineer, you're going to get given calculation tools, you're going to give them a PC, you're going to be able to run analysis, but you're not going to have Revit on your desktop. You're more than likely not going to have Navisworks on your desktop. That's the BIM team, right? So we've got to figure out both. We've got to figure out the education part, but we've also got to figure out the onboarding part when the kids come out of school and get into industry.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard for us to talk about our mistakes sometimes, but what mistakes would you personally share for others, maybe that you've made over the past few decades?
Getting into
maybe
BIM.
something that big mistake.
So the one story people have all kind of heard many times before is getting too big for your boots. So as I said, we got lucky in Hong Kong at one point, and we started doing really well. We kind of had a couple of casino jobs going. We had a couple of train metro projects going. Team had grown out to about 20, 25 people. There was money in the bank. There was a spring in my step. It was all great fun. And this was back 2009, 2010, well, maybe 2008, 2009. And then I got invited to get involved in jobs in the Middle East. So I got on a plane, flew out to Doha. They were doing the new Doha International Airport. They were doing a big exhibition center. I'm thinking, I can have a piece of this. So started putting together a bid, got in with some of the contractors. They loved what we were doing, mobilized a couple of guys. And all of a sudden, I found myself with 3 or 4 staff sitting in Qatar in basically a kind of a remote arrangement. No company set up in Qatar, no entity set up to build through. I just naively thought I could do it all out of Hong Kong, and then started realizing that, oops, we got ahead of ourselves here. Got a couple of problems with immigration. Had a couple of guys fly into Qatar, didn't have the right paperwork. They got turned around and got sent back to Hong Kong. I got out there, started trying to hold the fort, started flying between Hong Kong and Qatar and meet myself halfway along, or basically just flying over back, just got completely out of control. And then, of course, you drop the ball, miss a couple of things, and the client says, "Oh, I'm not paying you for this," blah, blah, blah. And you start getting into a bit of bother. So the lesson was, we got too big, too fast, probably too greedy, and learned that's not the way to go about setting up an international business. And then that wasn't a short timetable. That was probably over the period of about 9 to 12 months, maybe even 15 months that we went through that kind of roller coaster. And at the end of that period, we pulled our horns in and said, okay, we're going to draw back out of the Middle East. We're going to just consolidate what's going on in Hong Kong. and then the global financial crisis kicked in and bit us in the ass. So then I had to let a
Mm.
whole bunch of people go. So we went from this thriving company to a very small core of people delivering just a couple of projects. And all of a
Mm.
sudden it seemed like the whole world just collapsed around us. It was like, this is not what's supposed to happen. This is not the entrepreneurial dream. What the hell's going on? So
Yeah.
I think it was one of those things where if we'd had a bit more experience, and probably if I had a bit more, I've got no hair left now, but at those days, if I had a bit more gray hair, I would have said, okay, let's set up a company first. Let's get the right partner, and then let's go look for the business opportunity. But I'm really good at winning work. But in that case, I'd won the work before I'd actually set up the infrastructure to deliver it. So that was the kind of the learning. And then we kind of healed our wounds and got back on the horse and got a new investor in, and went off again. But that was a huge learning, as basically as the business took off, not to overdo it too quickly, because you can really burn. We burned through so much cash in 6 months. It was just mind bending how fast the money was going out the door.
Because
Thanks for sharing that.
regional challenges, is one thing, as well as people are doing it now again, going back to Saudi, going back to the Middle East, and I think some of those people are learning the lessons again that you've already learned.
Yeah, it's a lesson that's going to be learned over and over again. Me telling you is not going to make this. Maybe one person that listens to this interview is going to go, "Oh, I better check what's going on." But most people they see the dollar sign and they go, "Right, we'll sort all the other shit out later," and they realize that no, you got to sort the shit out first and then get the dollars.
That's good. So, Ronan, I'd really like to know what you're thinking the future looks like. Just near term, maybe the next 5 years. You're very close to the technology to date. What do you think it's going to look like as we sort of keep going forward?
Pretty much like it has for the last 15 or 20 years in a lot of ways. So if when you stand back and look at what's actually changed, say the last 15 years is a really good reference. The cloud has completely transformed what's going on. So the big jobs that I was doing 15 years ago, they were in Revit, they were in Navisworks. They're still the dominant tools, but they were all on servers inside of office locations. So you had to be in those locations to get access to the information. Excuse me. Now with the cloud and with the investment that Autodesk is making in ACC, the Bentley's putting into ProjectWise, all these big systems, all the data is going to go to the cloud. And we're going to see a lot more remote working. So we're going to see a lot more people in this kind of hybrid mode. So there's going to be 3 days in the office, 2 days away from the office, and that's all going to be enabled through this cloud system. And then that's probably going to allow for bigger teams overseas, like the Philippines, India, to have a bigger impact on some of these projects. Because like if you speak about where you guys are in Australia, there's a huge issue with talent and resources at the moment in terms of getting people to actual deliver projects. There's a huge crying out. But when you talk to them, so you have to have a visa to work in Australia. So the work's got to go offshore. So I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a move to that offshore business model. It's been tried in the past with some level of success, but they tend to offshore the drafting and not offshore the designing. I think we're going to see a lot more of the design getting offshore. I think we're going to see a lot more engineering work getting done offshore and then delivered to the actual projects. So you're going to have smaller teams client side and bigger teams in remote locations. Is one potential way this is going to play out. I think that the industry as a whole, we're going to see, again, the contractors pushing forward on a number of technologies that are really starting to come to the fore. Like the 360 cameras now are becoming really prominent. So you've got tools like Cupix, you've got tools like OpenSpace. They're really starting to claw into the market and win chunks of work. And they're bringing quite a lot of value. There's still a lot of improvement to be made to those platforms, but we're seeing them on a couple of projects now, and that will just continue to grow. So I think the link between the physical environment and the digital environment, the gap's going to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you see like I call it the bleeding edge, but you guys have probably seen Nazca and what the Nazca guys are doing with laser scanning and the point cloud stuff that they're getting into. They can validate whether something's built or not correctly. Now they don't come cheap, and there's a lot of effort involved, but that's where the technology is heading to. So again, at the bleeding edge, you're going to see things like the robot dogs with laser scanners on them. You're going to see a lot more drones flying around. You're going to see a lot more kind of video capture projects at the top end of the industry. And that's going to start filtering down into the middle industry pretty quickly, because there's a lot of value to the contractors. The old adage, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Well, wait till you see a 360-degree picture, how many thousands of words that's going to speak. And we still work in an industry that's built on claims, variations, an argumentative industry, and whoever's got the most 360 photographs is going to win a lot of those arguments. So I think reality capture is going to be a huge piece of the puzzle going forward. And then I think the third one is basically data analytics and project controls. Our industry has been really bogged down in Excel tables and pretty basic reporting for a long, long time, which is partly because of the pretty basic planning we do. But I think we're starting to see a move towards a lot more advanced planning features and a lot more project control. So planners getting a lot more detail and a lot more instant feedback and progress, and then starting to get some really solid data around how things are going to get built, what the resources are going to look like. And there's a couple of really interesting solutions coming up. Alice have developed a solution. There's a couple of guys in Singapore developed a solution where they're using algorithms and computation around scheduling and planning and resourcing. And there's some really clever stuff coming there. So I think the data analytics part, particularly for project controls, that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch as well. But the industry in and of itself, there's always going to be that 5-6% of the top end that are going to be doing these things, implementing these things, getting value from these things. And then there's going to be the large majority who are going to be like, oh, I saw something on LinkedIn about a guy using a drone. And then he goes back and does what he was doing an hour ago. So I think that's where the industry is going to be for the next 5-10 years. Is going to be disproportionate, a very small group of people at the top end doing some really clever, really valuable stuff, and the 80% trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
And asking what Navisworks is.
yeah. I've got an online course of Navisworks if anybody's interested.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tricky space. Like, what do you tell the GC of the future? Like, do they go all in, boots and all, on some of these technology? How do they evaluate what's going to move the needle and what's just going to be a blip? It's going to come and go.
So that was one of the things that I learned over the years. Is that so I call it the Gucci handbag effect, right? So what happens is one guy goes out and he gets this really cool technology, and this happened in Hong Kong, right? So Swire Properties went out and they got in with Frank Gehry, and they had Frank Gehry using Gehry technologies. Basically, they used an aeronautical design software to build effectively a box, right? And it was, oh, this is fantastic stuff. And there was there was more money spent on marketing than there was in the software, which probably sounds familiar to you guys if you're familiar with a big American software company, right? So the money gets spent on marketing and PR and not in actual software development. But they made so much noise and so much fuss. All the other developers going, oh, I want that. And there's basically this kind of like fear of missing out or the kind of jealousy factor, right? So that's the worst way of buying technology because the other guy is doing it. So what I do is when I speak to contractors, I say, okay, what we have to do is we got to figure out what problem are we trying to fix or what issue are we trying to address and what's the actual underlying problem or what's the underlying concern, and then find a solution that's actually going to bring results. So one really good example when we were doing MRT in KL, and this wasn't I was involved in it, but it wasn't my original idea. But the idea was that we would digitize a lot of the paperwork on the construction projects. So we had all these BIM things going on. We had all this information and models, but we were still building with paper forms for safety, paper forms for inspections, paper forms for concrete testing. The whole shoot match was all in paper, and it still is predominantly. So we set about figuring out, was there a solution out there that we could digitize some of these processes? And we started looking for solutions, and we came across a thing called FieldView, which had been developed in the UK predominantly with Laing O'Rourke. So we got our hands on a couple of licenses, and we realized actually this is really good stuff. So we set up FieldView, and we started basically building out forms for all the different inspections and everything else. Now, the original intention was just to smoothen out some of the processes and start getting some efficiency on the job sites. But what we discovered was there was a huge uptake because some of these processes were tied back to payments. And the subcontractors realized that once they got things approved and once things were signed off, they could then trigger payments much, much quicker. And doing it digitally was faster than doing it with paper. And so the subcontractors saw a benefit to them in terms of cash flow. And we saw a massive benefit because we didn't lose any data. We didn't lose any of the forms. Nobody spilled a cup of coffee on it. Nobody put it in the wrong file. Didn't end up in the bin. We had all the data backing it up. And then the FieldView guys cottoned us on through their API that we could actually start building reporting dashboards off the back of some of these forms. So we then started figuring out, well, if we actually improve some of the forms and some of the information we're capturing, we can get a better reporting structure and we can actually start getting better dashboards. So the problem was getting paper and taking it off the site to make things more efficient. But the actual upside was we've just digitized an entire workflow. Now, that same contractor, Gamuda, they've now moved into ACC, and they're now transitioning into using the ACC form system, and they're building out all those forms, and they're going through that process. But that wasn't about, we've got this really cool field view technology, how do we use it? Or it wasn't, well, Langer Rourke are doing it, let's copy Langer Rourke. It started off with, we want to solve a problem around inefficiency on our job sites and missing information, lack of information, and this is how we're going to do it. So when I speak to contractors now, I say, look, first of all, we're going to define what is the problem that you're now trying to fix, and then we're going to go find the solution. Whether that's recording progress on site, whether that's calculating volumes on an excavation, whatever it's going to be, whether it's productivity or whatever the weakness is, we start off defining the problem, we start figuring out what the ROIs would be, and then we look for the technologies. Anybody who goes out and says, oh, I saw Ronan doing a presentation about drones, let's go buy a drone, they've gone about it the wrong way.
Yeah, I love that thinking, that it's the rule first principles thinking. And I guess your engineering mindset, arrives at that. It's problem, solution, fit. It's not finding a solution and then having a solution, then finding the problem. That's just shopping for Gucci handbags.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's trying to one up the other guy, because I look at my Gucci handbag as fancier than your Gucci handbag. And by the way, they're all genuine fakes made in Shenzhen.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what we see this in in LinkedIn, and in this pretty small echo chamber that we find ourselves in. There's a lot of like ego and shiny object, syndrome going on. It's like, oh, we've got this new shiny thing over here. Hang on, what are we trying to solve? What's the problem with the dirt and the concrete that we're trying to fix?
Yeah, and that's at the end of the day. Like there was a thread a couple of days ago, again on LinkedIn, because I spent half my time causing trouble on LinkedIn. But it was the same thing as like the technology is not actually helping the guys in the boots on the ground. And I made the comment, is if you're not helping the guys with boots on the ground, you shouldn't be involved, because you're not actually adding. If you're creating more work for them, then I don't blame them. You're not helping them out. But if you're going to provide a solution, it better save them time. It better save them an issue on site. There's no point shoving a digital format up their nose and saying you need to go and buy the new iPhone 15 to be able to use our new digital solution. It's going to get thrown back in your face. So you've got to figure out what is the value proposition, who's going to need to use it, and then make sure they're going to get a benefit from it. And if you're going to get involved with the guys on the job site, make it simple. KISS is the only way forward, is keep it simple, stupid. And the guys on the job site don't have the patience, they don't have the time, and they certainly don't have the interest to figure out a really complicated IT solution. If they can't figure it out in 3 seconds, it's going in the bin.
Yeah, it's a good test, actually.
It's a great test. If the guys inside take to it and they use it, you're onto something. If the guys start slagging you off and you start getting kind of abuse from them, you're on the wrong track.
Yeah, this kind of feeds back to what we were talking about earlier. It's closing the loop on. We've got to. There's a commercial reality here, and we got to be self-aware enough to know, hang on, this technology we've been pushing for 3 years, it actually stinks. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't move the needle. And we've got to be honest about that. Because like you're saying, we look back over the last 20 years, we have, in some areas, some quadrants, we haven't shifted enough, and we've got to say why. We've got to ask those questions and be honest with some of the solutions that we're providing.
Yep. And look at the ones that have, right? So go look at the success cases. There are really, really good success cases out there. Like the one people I always refer people to is look at PlanGrid. Look what PlanGrid did, and look at the payout. And it's a unicorn. There's no question. PlanGrid is a complete unicorn. But they took a very simple problem and they put together a very unique group of people, and they come up with a really clever solution. And they were super successful because it worked, and it worked with the guys on the job site. And that's how they got so successful, so big, and so fast. They had an easy-to-use solution that was popular with the guys on the site, and it just took off. And that's what you got to look to, is that you got to go and dig into that business case and figure out, what did those guys do? How did they go about doing it? And why were they so successful? What was the secret sauce that they had that everybody else seems to be missing? And why did Autodesk spend $700-something million to buy them? Like those are the kind of use cases you got to go and look at. Okay, there are companies out there that have figured this out, and there's companies that are never going to figure this out. And you got to be able to look at both those business cases and okay, what are the good guys got, and what are the guys that are floundering? What are they missing? And it all comes down to value. If you're not adding value at the job site, or if you're not actually adding to the balance sheet of those companies, your solution may not suck. It might be absolutely brilliant in terms of what it does, but if it doesn't have a commercial value, you've got a certain amount of rope, and then you're going to run out of rope.
Yeah, yeah,
So true.
Now it's starting to turn into a business lecture.
I love it. Anything else? Any other advice that you'd have for the general contractor or even the consultants trying to come along, try and push along?
So
any advice there?
So this is not going to go away, right? So this whole digital transformation in the industry is not going to go away, right? So the biggest buzz in Malaysia right now is data centers are getting built at a rate of knots. So there's so many people building data centers. You're going, well, okay, there's something going on here with all this AI stuff and all these phones and all this mobile. So it's not going away. The industry is going to get digitalized sooner or later. So the best advice is find out some of the problems that you're facing, figure out where you're losing money, and then start figuring out what potential solutions are out there, and then set up some pilot studies. So get a project, try something out, get a piece of software, get a bit of hardware, go buy a drone, go buy a 360 camera, try it out on a project, and maybe not do the whole project. Maybe try out a key area of the building, maybe a plant room, maybe a basement, maybe just a sequence of work like a steelwork assembly, but try something out and do it with a bunch of guys that are really keen. There's lots of people in lots of companies who've got a real kind of like can-do attitude, want to learn attitude. Find those guys in your business and give them a bit of rope, give them a bit of cash, and let them loose. Cap it off, give them some objectives, and then if it works, scale it up. If it doesn't work, go find something else. But if you're not doing that kind of research and development, then you're going to get caught out sooner or later. And what I've discovered over the years, and I learned this lesson when I was with Gamuda, is that you have to train the younger generation, and the best way to do that is to let them loose on small scales. So if you want to bring up the next level of management, give them a budget, give them some objectives, and see if they can deliver. And they will learn so much by doing that kind of project that it will pay dividends 5, 10, 15 years down the road when it comes to actually running real projects and running a real business. So I think that there's a win-win in there, that even if the technology doesn't pan out the way you want it to pan out, you may well start training up your staff through a sideline exercise or an additional piece of work exercise to actually gain some benefit. But every contractor, every engineering firm, every architectural practice, they need to be taking this digitalization thing seriously. It's not going away. And we're not going to end up in a world where we're all going to go back and start doing drawings with ink pens and tracing paper. That's not happening, right? So it's a case of everything's going to get more and more digitized. So you've got to figure out how you're going to use that to your advantage in your business. And the only way to do that is to try it out small scale, room by room, building by building, to scale it up to your entire business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. So what's next for your business? We can plug the Navisworks training course. What else are you doing there?
So I'm currently working with HSS engineers in Malaysia, and we're basically working on metro projects. So I'm working on MRT3, which is the third metro project in Malaysia. It's been slightly delayed, but we're expecting that kind of come to life pretty quick. I was in the Philippines this week. We're looking at some opportunities in the Philippines. And I'm involved in a couple of projects in Singapore, with some infrastructure projects in Singapore. So I'm still heavily involved in infrastructure projects, and I'll continue to do that. My role has transitioned to more the senior role as the kind of training and getting people going. And I think personally, certainly in the next couple of years, I'd like to go back to being more of an independent consultant and going around and giving people training and advice. But at the moment, I'm quite happy getting somebody else to pay my wages and not have to go hunting for the work. But I do miss the entrepreneurial side of it. But for now, it's basically railways, airports, and if I can get my hands on them, some data centers. So that's kind of what my kind of trajectory looks like.
Awesome.
Yeah. And spending time on LinkedIn, sharing experience and knowledge.
People are going to come find you on LinkedIn now, you know.
They don't really, I would probably say, Luke, most of our connections are similar. So I would think that I've got a pretty huge following on LinkedIn. So I'd imagine that, a few more people will come and find me. But I've been on LinkedIn since it started. So I got into LinkedIn way back in 2004, I think it was. So I've got quite a huge following on LinkedIn. And I always get ribbed for it. So it's like people will come up to me in at a Lighthouse Club event in Malaysia saying, "Oh, we haven't seen you on LinkedIn this week," or else they come up and saying, "Are you ever doing any work? I just always see you on LinkedIn." So yeah, so if your listeners haven't come across me on LinkedIn, they've been living in a cave. That's all I can say on that one.
Awesome. So, Ronan, we're kind of sort of heading towards wrapping up. We've got this quick fire round, and I would like to understand what the structural engineering mind of yours is going to come up with some of these answers. So we've got a choice of 3 tools. They're not digital tools. It's a hammer, screwdriver, or some duct tape. What are you going to grab?
Screwdriver.
Screwdriver. There we go. So we could use that as a lever. We could tighten things
you can do a lot of stuff with a screwdriver. I've probably got one about 3 feet from here if I went looking for it, mate. Hammer's only good if you want to destroy stuff, and duct tape doesn't do much. So screwdriver is a far more useful tool.
I like it.
Question is it a Phillips screwdriver or a straight head screwdriver?
Oh, it's got to be the Phillips.
It's got both.
It's
a special one.
What's the next question?
Concrete, steel, or timber?
Steel.
Okay.
Actually, well, can I change my answer? Timber.
Oh yeah. And then we also want to know favorite piece of hardware tech that you've seen recently.
Favorite piece of tech I've seen recently. 360 cameras are the tech that I think is going to be really transformational.
I think they're cool, yeah. So lightweight. The data's lightweight, easy to use.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Are these questions connected, or are these just random questions?
No, they're connected across episodes. So we get to see you're the first screwdriver, so it's good. Yeah, it's a survey because we're going to start a business selling hammers, screwdrivers, or duct tape, and we just want to find out which is the most popular. Yeah.
Good luck.
Okay, so Ronan, we are wrapping up now. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and you've shared so much wisdom and some advice, and just how you've been curious all through your career, and it's got you to see some pretty amazing things and do some really cool stuff in the industry. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation, guys. Much appreciated. And best of luck with this podcast. I think you guys are going to, again, make a contribution, which is great. So I look forward to seeing who else you get on this in the next couple of weeks and months.
Thank you, mate. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.